Late 1940. During World War, the Germans invented a stimulant to allow soldiers to remain alert on the battlefield for long hours. This stimulant was also used by British and American soldiers. The Soviets created their own version of the stimulant, but first they needed to test it on humans. So the scientists decided to test it on prisoners of war. To encourage their participation in the experiment, they were promised freedom upon completion. 5 men were selected. They were placed in an isolated gas chamber equipped with beds, a toilet, a sink, a system designed to deliver the stimulant in gas form, various sensors, microphones, and a single window with 3-centimeter thick glass. The stimulant was experimental and little was known about it. What was known was that the gas was safe and would not kill them. They placed them in the chamber and began to supply the gas. For the first 4 days of the experiment, everything went fairly smoothly. On the 5th day, the researchers noticed a slight change in the men's interactions, and from the simple chatting that had been occurring on the first days, they began to talk only about the horrible events that had happened in their lives. They also began to complain about the experiment. By the 6th day, the men had completely stopped talking to each other. They became paranoid about the other researchers. They would approach the microphones and whisper terrible things about the supposedly gruesome crimes committed by the other men. By the 9th day, the experiment took a drastic turn for the worse. The 10th day's morning began with one of the subjects screaming. The researchers watched as the subject ran from one corner of the chamber to another for 3 hours. He screamed in a distorted voice. Then he finally stopped screaming. But the scientists could still hear an indistinct sound, like a squeak. The scientists later found out that the man had torn out his own vocal cords. The other subjects did not react at all to the screaming. At that time, they covered the glass by urinating on newspapers and sticking them to the glass, thus blocking the view into the chamber. With the subjects no longer making any sound, there was a deadly silence in the chamber. By the 13th day, the scientists were still debating what to do, as they could no longer hear or see anything. So they didn't know what was happening in there, but they knew the subjects were alive, judging by the oxygen level sensors. After 3 days of silence, they began to worry that either the microphone was broken or that something was really wrong with the subjects. So they decided to announce over the loudspeaker that they were going to enter the chamber, check the microphone, and that the subjects must behave calmly and lie on the ground. And then, after 3 days of silence, one of the subjects spoke. "We don't want to be released anymore." The researchers thought that since the microphone was obviously working and the subjects seemed fine, they wouldn't go in. The silence continued until the 15th day. The subjects made no sound. As midnight of the 15th day approached, the researchers decided that was it. The experiment was over. They turned off the stimulant supply and began supplying oxygen. Then they heard the subjects' screams. They moaned and begged the researchers to turn the gas back on. When they opened the chamber door, everything looked like something out of a horror movie. Only 4 of the 5 subjects were left alive. From the body of the dead subject, pieces of flesh seemed to have been torn out and were scattered in the middle of the room. The drain was clogged with pieces of flesh. It was full of water everywhere. The bodies of the other 4 subjects also had wounds with torn pieces of flesh. Torn not with teeth but with hands, they were eating themselves. The food that had been supplied to them had been untouched for days. It seemed that they had gone mad and were eating themselves. They didn't want to leave the chamber and continued to beg for the researchers to turn on the gas. Soldiers arrived to help the researchers remove the subjects. The subjects resisted very aggressively. One of the subjects jumped on a soldier and bit him in the neck. The soldier bled to death in the hospital. One of the prisoners struggled so violently that he fell dead. It is believed his heart stopped. They pulled out the other 3 prisoners, tied them up, and placed them on a bed. They were immediately taken to the hospital to have their wounds treated. The most injured prisoner was the first to be taken to the operating room. To prepare him for surgery, they wanted to give him a sedative, but he resisted strongly, repeating that he needed to return to his cell, that he needed a stimulant. They managed to inject him with a sedative, and as soon as he fell asleep, he died. After the first one died, they brought the second one into the operating room. The prisoner's vocal cords were torn. Resisting, he lost consciousness and also died, with the last prisoner remaining, and the first 2 having died as soon as they fell asleep. The researchers decided to return him to his cell. But this time, they attached a sensor to monitor his brainwaves. Watching the monitor, they noticed that his brainwaves would spike and then suddenly stop, and this repeated continuously. One of the researchers noticed that whenever the prisoner closed his eyes, his brain activity stopped. So they decided to turn the stimulant back on as quickly as possible. But they were too late, and he fell asleep and also died. With all the prisoners dead, no one ever knew what killed them. Was it the stimulant, or was it the fact that they hadn't slept? Or was it a combination of both? That's all about the Russian sleep experiment. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you in the next interesting documentary video.